Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to YWCA Bucks County's community discussion regarding racial and social justice. We're back for another week of exciting and very great discussions that we've been having, in my opinion. I'm Jessica, one of the case managers here at the YWCA Bucks County. This week we have a special treat for everyone where we kind of brought most of the speakers that we've had in previous weeks to kind of do a round table and kind of collaborate and talk about everyone's experience. And I think it's going to be really awesome. As always, we want to remind panelists and attendees that we want this to be an open discussion where people feel safe to ask questions, share stories. So remember just to be respectful of everyone involved. And with that being said, I will pass it over to our executive director, Guillaume Stewart. I know he wants to say a few words before we get started.
Yes, thank you, Jess. I just wanted to take this opportunity to say thank you to all of the listeners that have listened and sent us questions, have called us and said, how can we be involved? The last 3 months or so have really been impactful in terms of connecting with the community around social justice and around the work of equity in society. And so I wanted to give a shout out to our listeners who've been with us from the beginning of this series into this present moment. And I would be remiss if I didn't thank all the panelists that took time to talk to us, met with us in advance to give us a sense of who you were and how important this work is to you. So to Celia Sharp, I want to say thank you. I'm just going through my boxes. Thank you so much, Celia, for your work and your efforts in this regard. Dr. Stewart, thank you so much for the amazing work that you did and how much we learned as a result of that. And Fred, thank you so much for being a part of it. Even though I blew the secret about the you know what, I'm not going to talk about it anymore, but thank you, Fred, so much for being a part of it. Jenny, thank you so much for this work, your conversation. I think it was really important. We got a lot out of it. Thank you for supporting the Y. Marlene, thank you so much for your work. Big time fan of yours and the work that you do. And thank you for being a part of it. Tanya, one of our board members, thank you so much for your work. We're better off not only around social justice, but just your HR lens that you brought to us really, really gave us some powerful tools to use in the work that we do on an organizational level. So thank you. Dr. Hudson, thank you so much for being a part of our conversation. I think you added so much value to this important series. We appreciate it. We're inspired by your work. And thank you so much. Jess, I'm not going to thank you. You see that? Is that bad? You're in my box. But Jess, you know, you already been amazing. You know that you're amazing. Last but not least, Matt, thank you so much for being a part of this speaker series. We know that the work you do is important. And we know that the issues of social justice, it's really important to you, and that came across in your interview. So thank you to all of you. I'm looking forward to this dialogue, and I want to turn it back to my coworker and colleague, Jessica.
Yeah, so G decided to put the pressure back on me for this week to actually ask the questions, so bear with me. I also just want to say to all the attendees, if you haven't been a part of these discussions before, we will talk for about a half hour. And we will give time at the end. Please put any questions in the Q&A, and we will get to those later. And if you have specific questions for specific speakers, I think that's great, or general is good too. So for this first question, I talked to all the panelists and I said, I'm going to ask the question and just kind of what G did, go around my Zoom and let everyone give their input. So the first question will be, what are some of the positive and negative impacts that you have all seen as a result of this sort of, I want to say, kind of the newer heightened awareness to racial and social injustices? So I'm going to go to the first person on my screen, which is Celia. Thank you, Celia. I'm going to unmute you. Let's see, do you see that? No. There you go, perfect.
Okay, that's very much for inviting me to be part of this forum. This forum is an example of the positive impacts. More Americans are now openly questioning how democratic and democracy really is, how democratic our democracy really is. Many live under the system of racial authoritarianism. They suffer police atrocities, corruption, poverty, violence, disenfranchisement, and poor health like people in authoritarian countries. But on a race-selective basis, right here in the USA, awareness is knowledge, and knowledge is power. In just 48 days, we will have an election that is a chance to disempower racial authoritarianism and get back on track to make our country truly democratic. The negative impacts are that the forces of racial authoritarianism has seized upon the relative minor participation of looters and violent demonstrators to try to scare people and to silence them from the anti-racist movement. This is poor demagoguery. Just like saying, oh, male embodying is fraud, or climate change is not real, or COVID-19 just go away like magic. But unfortunately, it works. There is no guarantee that the election will result in substantial change.
Thank you for that, Celia. The next person who I have on my screen is Ashley, Dr. Ashley Stewart.
Hey y'all, hey, thank you so much for inviting me back and for the opportunity to talk. I don't know how we answer this in such a brief moment, right? That it's very, very complicated in terms of what has happened positively and what are still some of the barriers. For sure, you know, this has been an opportunity for people to become aware in ways that they weren't before. It's really in people's faces, it's very present, it's very unavoidable, and that has increased the conversations. I know for myself, doors have been open that I would have had to pry open before. I've seen policies being changed on institutional levels. I'm having conversations in places that before, you know, we wouldn't have been able to go as deeply and examine the issues like systemic and structural oppression. We're having conversations talking about anti-racism, giving clearer definitions and helping other folks be able to articulate and understand what really are we talking about when we say ideological structural white supremacy and anti-Black racism, and how that's an interracial conversation, intercultural conversation, and the complexities of that. But what I will say is the challenge is that for some folks who are not part of that conversation, whether it's because they haven't had the opportunity to be, or because those, you know, those are conversations they're not interested in, it has created a mode of deflection, dissociation, and discomfort. And when people don't embrace that and say, maybe I don't fully understand these concepts, let me engage or learn more about it, and put up a barrier to it, then we see even more deeply rooted oppression occurring. We see this through some really major national policy-based, funding-based initiatives that are occurring that are really beginning to create more barriers to this really essential conversation that we have a platform and opportunity to talk about. So I think these conversations do scare folks, but what I will say is that I think that that fear comes with not really knowing what these conversations are about. Because when we talk about it, we realize it's not a divisive conversations. It's actually one that's bringing us together to be able to critically examine how do we create a more equitable society. And so that, you know, I hope that that's the message that we get moving forward, and more people become more open to engaging and thinking critically about racism and oppression.
That was great, and I think that was a perfect way to put all that into a short answer, so thank you. Next up, I have Fred Harran.
Oh, sure. I got to follow the doctor. Sure. Great. I think she said it, so well, the doctor did. But, the positive and the negatives, and I think I might overlap the two answers, number one, number two. But for me, the positives from a law enforcement perspective, and I've been doing this 33 years, is that people are coming to the table. People are working together. My colleagues, myself, and I'll just talk about myself. I'm more open to change and to ideas. Last week, we entered into an agreement for the first time in Bucks County. We penned, Karen Downer, the president of the NAACP, and I, and Township, penned an agreement of openness and transparency, and them being a part of things that we're doing here. And I think those are things that wouldn't have happened before. I think so. The things that are going on around this country, and I like to really talk about Bucks County, are positive in that way, is that we're bringing groups to the table to work with one another. And what I've learned, and I'll hit on this when we come back to number two, is that, it doesn't matter what I think. It's a matter of what other people think. And I can sit and hold my breath and stand on my feet and say, no, that's not true. But if people believe it to be true, then I have to deal with it. And I have to deal with people's feelings. I have to deal with people's, what they perceive and what might be happening. And I've got to make the change. It's my responsibility in Bensalem, to make sure that we make that change. The negatives, I wish people would give us a chance. Are there wrongs? Yes, we've seen them. But as you've probably seen so many times, no one hates bad cops more than good cops. Nobody. And it does so much, 9 minutes with George Floyd undid 40 years of policing in 9 minutes. And, that wrong, I don't know if it can ever be righted, but, we're trying to work hard. But sometimes people don't give us a chance to work hard and make the change and to get people to understand us so we can understand them. I think that's the negatives. There's still a lot of people who want, I believe, there's still a lot of people that just want the hate out there, and we've got to stop that. And both sides have to stop that, or both groups, or everybody involved. I don't want to say sides. That's probably a poor choice of words. But everybody involved, everybody that wants something positive, we've got to work hard to suppress the ones that don't. Together, as a group, as a team, we can do it, and we can make sure that we overcome this, and we can make sure that everybody understands one another, and that we can make the positive change. And I think we're doing it here in Bensalem, and certainly I know Matt Weintraub is going to talk, certainly in Bucks County, and Matt's got some great projects going here for all 39 police departments in Bucks County. That's going to make some major change and bring us, unified as one. So that's, as quick as I can for number one.
Thank you, Fred. Yes, I agree that I think we could probably all agree that bringing kind of these two different parties, I don't want to say sides like you said, but together to, move forward is beneficial. Next up, I have Tayna Longino.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you, G, for inviting me once again to this space to have a continued conversation. And I'm honored to sit amongst my peers and colleagues and friends who share in wanting to make a difference and be change agents in this work. This is not a new conversation for Black and Brown people. It is a conversation and, unfortunately, a reality that many of us live every day. The difference in what's happened over the last, I would say, few months is that a bright light has been shined on it by way of social media and those little things, those cell phones. But it's indeed something that I'm happy that we're continuing conversations with communities that don't necessarily feel comfortable having the discussion. It's causing us to get closer to one another, come in close proximity to one another, to uncover some assumptions and some biases that all of us hold, and unfortunately that many of us carry out. But this type of dialogue and the necessity for us to sit close together and talk about ways that we can dismantle in the work that I do in human resources, you always hear us talk about being invited to sit at the table. What these conversations have done is cause dialogue around, now that I'm at the table, you've invited me to come, are you going to listen to my point of view? Do you value what I have to say? So that's where I feel a lot of hope around these discussions, and I'm hopeful that they will continue. Dr. Stewart talked about the discomfort and the uneasiness. And what I'm hopeful of is that we will not disengage from those dialogues and move to action. So that's what I'm hopeful for. It saddens me to see the politicizing that happens as a result of some of the discussions that we're having. But just like many around the gallery, can't say around the room anymore, but around the gallery, I believe that we're all in a space that we want to make the change. We want to see it happen, and we're committed to these discussions and the actions that we hope to come from it. So thank you once again for inviting me to the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Tanya. And I just saw Marlene said she had to hop out really quick because her kids are doing virtual school and she needed to help them. So she should be back. I'm going to move to Jenny Isaacs.
Hi, everyone. Again, thank you also for bringing us all back together. I have the opportunity to share and dialogue. So for me, I mean, I do think that a negative of this can sometimes be that people could be discouraged by the revelation of the scope and the scale and the deep penetration of this issue. That can feel demoralizing. But I think that the balancing on the balance, the positive, has been this opportunity to lift up the focus. I think there's been a general growth in people engaging with issues that are not just national, but global in scale, by thinking about what they can accomplish on the local level with grassroots mutual aid engagement, thinking about how do we build structures that nurture the needs of, that exist within our communities. So for me, that's a very positive and exciting outcome. And we see it happening both in terms of the networks of protest and in terms of the attention, the opportunity, that this series gave to shine the light on some work that's happening here in Bucks County. So that is very positive to me. And I also think another piece for me, for us specifically in the immigration side of things, has been the opportunity to really lift up into to everybody as part of our education, the intertwining of immigration enforcement, of reliance on deportation and detention as being inextricably related to mass incarceration and criminalization, so that becomes something to recognize that these issues are not singular different strands, but sort of reflect something that we are beginning to see, how very clearly how deeply it operates in our society, and again, what the scale of change needs to be, not just reform, but building new systems that start with some of the skills that we learn at these local, engaging at the local level. I don't want to let the opportunity pass by to let folks know that on this call with me, Celia Sharp and Marlene Pray were instrumental co-founders of the little neighborhood collective that was Immigrant Rights Action when we first got together in 2017. We have followed a track of now becoming a full-fledged nonprofit because we saw that there was nothing like that in Bucks County. But it started at the local level with neighbors and individuals coming together. And so that was an example for me of the kind of building that continues to happen. And that's our hope for the future.
Thank you, Jenny. And that's awesome. I think it's so inspirational when you hear those stories of kind of, like you said, just a neighborhood little group turning into bigger and bigger and really being able to cause a positive impact. So we have two more. I'm going to move over to the District Attorney, Matt Weintraub.
There we go. Thank you, Jess. I don't want to sound unoriginal. A lot of the panelists have hit on the themes that I want to touch on. So one thing that I've noticed in a positive is that this movement, it's got to be more than a moment. It's got to be a movement that continues with momentum and action and change, as opposed to everybody just doing something to make themselves feel better. But one thing I've noticed is there's been a much greater reach, a broader spectrum of people have become involved, and a much greater penetration, which I think is important. And I want to use an anecdote. So Tayna took part in a training for a mandatory training that we had in our office. And I didn't know how it was going to go. When you make people do something, it's very hard to get buy-in, but we did it. And some people had to be led there and other people were really interested in it. But the conversation was just such a buzz. And I was paired in a small group with a young ADA who, if God forbid you were ever a victim of a crime, you want this young lady prosecuting the case because she is very determined fighter for justice. But she is pretty rigid in her thinking and conservative, I would say, in her thinking. And I think that was reflected in the training. But afterwards, she came to me and she said, you know, I had a case. There was a preliminary hearing where a guy had to fly himself up from Texas, but the cops had jumped to, they did not do a good job on the investigation, and he was the wrong man. And he had to come all the way up here from Texas on his own dime to essentially prove that we had arrested the wrong guy. So justice was served. The case was cleared out at the preliminary hearing because this young this ADA saw what had occurred was wrong. But that in the past, I believe she would have left it at that. Pat herself on the back, no harm, no foul. But she wanted to be proactive. And she asked me for permission to contact the police to get them to pay for his plane ticket and his lost time. And that is very proactive and the right thing to do. And of course, I'm like, yeah, let's go for it. And she appealed with my help to the chief of that police department, and they paid. They recompensed this man for, and I don't know, look, he's never going to get that time back, and there's a lot of stigma involved. I don't want to oversell that. But to me, that was really a leap across the Rubicon, especially for this young lady who is such a determined prosecutor and a fighter for justice, that she saw the injustice that had been perpetrated on this man. So that's my anecdote. But to get into the negative for a second, and somebody else talked about this, maybe it was Jenny, we've become too politicized. To me, social justice, racial justice, human rights, that's not a political issue, and it should never be politicized for either party for convenience sake. It's just too important. And I worry that when it does become politicized, that then it can be just sort of contained and then snuffed out. So that we have to resist the urge to politicize, to compartmentalize this, and make sure that we continue to stress that this is about social justice, racial justice, human rights. And if we can overcome that politicization, I think we're going to make some real change.
Great, thank you, Matt. And now we do have two more. I'm going to move over to Dr. Karen Hudson.
Can you hear me? Okay. I just want to thank you all for inviting me to participate in this series and inviting me to join you guys today in this follow-up conversation and discussion. I also want to take the opportunity to applaud the YWCA for the leadership that you guys have shown and are taking in Bucks County to really talk about this important issue and to keep moving this along. I have the problem here of being one of the very last people to speak, and so much of what I'm going to say is probably similar in theme to what some of my colleagues have said. But what I'd like to add to this conversation is, having been doing this work now for the past 40 years, I can honestly say that I'm tired. I'm tired, I'm weary, I'm fatigued, and I'm forlorn. But what keeps me going is thinking and remembering that the history of these types of struggles in our country has never been easy and has never been quick. You know, we have to just be willing to roll up our sleeves and stay in this fight in order for change to really happen. You know, in the settings where I work, which are universities, health systems, and in the community, I can certainly say to you that I've been talking to people for a long time about racism is something we need to be talking about. It is the elephant in the room. And unfortunately, some people don't want to call it out, call it by its name, or talk about it. But we have to do that in order for people to get comfortable with this conversation, learn something about themselves, and be willing to make a change. But the other thing that we have to recognize is that people are at different places on their journey to making change and to accepting the idea that they need to change on some level. And so people's readiness to change has got to be a part of our thinking so that we don't get ourselves worn down in trying to help people move along on this journey before their time is ready for them to move along on this journey. So for me, that brings up the point of, again, just self-care. How do we take care of ourselves, you know, in this journey? Because we don't want this. This is definitely not just a moment. It is a movement. But every time in this country where we've had a movement like this, it has never been quick. It has never been easy. And so I do just want to encourage people to really think about how they can take care of themselves in order to not get worn down in this struggle. Because I do think that we are at a place now where I don't know that I've seen in my lifetime and in my experience of the intergenerations of people, the multicultural combination of folks that are part of this march and this protest and this opportunity to make real sustained change in our country. And I think that that's really huge. And I just want to say that that's what makes this feel to me like it is really very different. And I do think that we should just be happy about this place where we are. But again, the negative part of this, I think, is it can be brutal when we're out here on the front lines trying to make this change and talking to people who are really not ready for this change. If we don't find it some armor and a way to protect ourselves, it can be detrimental to us.
Yes, I agree, Karen. And it's hard sometimes to remember the self-care piece of all of this right now. For me personally, I feel like, and this is coming from a white woman, but it's on my head constantly. You know what I mean? So it's hard to keep that self-care piece in mind for sure. And last but certainly not least, we have Miss Marlene.
Hey, that work? Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you to the Y and G and Jessica for welcoming me. And it's really an honor and humbling to be here with all these good people in our community and all of the participants listening out there. So to me, one of the most positive outcomes of this moment within this movement is the engagement of young people and the engagement of teenagers and of children. There have been over 30 Black Lives Matter protests in Doylestown since June, and most of them, like 75% or so of them have been organized by children. Some of them by 9-year-olds, many of them by teenagers. And to me, that is an immensely important piece of what's going on internationally, certainly nationally, and here in Bucks County. Also the intersectionality that is being, that's happening in some places, in some ways, is really significant and positive. Many of the youth that I work with that have been organizing and participating in actions, in education, in protests, in fundraising campaigns are members of the LGBTQ community, like myself, and seeing that, just the absolute clarity of how important it is to engage in struggles for human rights and civil rights for one another is huge. I also believe that it's strengthened some community partnerships, including just looking around this, beautiful tapestry of faces. Some of the partnerships here within this very conversation and this panel. There's been some accountability. There's been some actual laws, policies, corporate changes that have happened and that have happened swiftly. And but they did not just happen because of what's going on this year. These have been built on hundreds of years, often, of struggle. But to see some of those changes happen is significant. Some of the negative pieces, and I don't see them as negative impacts of heightened awareness. I see them as negative impacts of white supremacy, and I also see them very serious and many of them growing. So I would say the violence, the actual murder of people in the name of white supremacy is serious, and the also denial that we have, the increase in the volume and the resistance to what we are all on this call for is deeply concerning. Centering white voices is also a concern, and that's often something that happens and something that I often take a part in. So, and I'll speak more to that when I talk about the personal stuff in the next question. Another thing that I've heard a lot from some of my friends who are people of color is the exposure, the public living of trauma out loud for many people of color in a way that is really, Dr. Hudson talked about it, the need to take care of ourselves and the absolute impact of having so much public exposure. And with that, I think there's been some sensitivity. I know even for myself about reposting things, and it's not a subtle thing to add a trigger warning and to be mindful of what we share, because it impacts people in very different ways. The tokenizing that sometimes happens, I think, is really a concern. Oh, we did this one thing, or we made this one policy, or we changed this one pancake syrup, or we hired this one new Black police officer, or we complied with this new regulation. Like, all of these things are not meaningful if they're not broad and systematic and in place, so that when that person that put it in place leaves, that is part of the institution and the system. I think they'll wrap up by saying some of the lack of action in our public schools is a concern to me, that there's been some institutional push for changes in the country and in our community, but there's a lot of resistance within our public schools are one of the most conservative institutions and systems within the United States. And of course they were created in order to uphold white supremacy. And so this is a big push to change that. And I think that's a big concern, even just getting, simple changes in the way we address history, not to mention the hiring and retention and the issues of the school to prison pipeline. Like, we got a lot of work to do there. I do feel hopeful about that work, but there's a lot to do. And I also am really concerned about the false equivalency between their, and I'm so grateful for this group and even the way we catch ourselves talking about the sides. Like there's immorality and evil and violence and murder. And then there is morality and human rights and equity and justice. And I think that is a false equivalency to say, which side are you on? Do you think we should, advance racism or dismantle racism? Those are not two sides. Those are, really, to me, that is very much a moral issue. And I get caught up in that, especially when I'm, talking to people from wide political and wide viewpoints, that it becomes this like, well, there's just these two sides and I happen to be on this one. And I think that's troubling. So as an educator, as well as an organizer, that's something that I'm turning on in terms of how to have an impact. So thank you.
Thank you. Oh, G, I was going to say, thank you all for sharing. I was going to give G a second to talk if you want to talk before the next question.
Yes, to give our panelists time to think about the next tough question. I want to say this, the impact of this series and your participation in this series has really been immense on the YWCA. And Jess and I and our committee were talking about this just last week, that in your role, we met with each of you and learned about the work that you do and the passions that you have towards social justice and towards community. And we were inspired by that. And so I was thinking to myself after we left our committee meeting, what kind of quote, I always sing quotes, maybe sometimes too much, but what kind of quote can I say that would kind of express how we feel and about your work, about your involvement, all of the panelists. And I thought of Dr. King's quote around service. And he says that everyone can be great because everyone can serve. And I think that really came across in our interviews with you guys, that you're interested in serving the community and helping people. And we want to say thank you to everyone for doing that. You're an example to our listeners that no matter what work you do, academia, law enforcement, social justice work, science, all the fields represented here, you have a voice and you can serve. And so we wanted to say thank you. And thank you, Jess, for allowing me to share that with the group.
Absolutely. And I have to second kind of everything that G just said about, we were talking, and I think Dr. Stewart actually mentioned that a lot of the knowledge that's being spread around now and conversations that are happening have helped a lot of people to hone in on, well, one, learn a little bit about themselves and their own beliefs, and then take that and put it into practice and see where they fit in this movement. Whether that's going to protests, whether that's joining a call like this, or whether that's writing to your representatives and legislators. So I just think it's all really important, and we're all doing a great job. So it's already 1:40, and so I want to ask the next question, but I want everyone to be able to speak, but I want to try my best to keep it maybe to 10 minutes, because we do have a question already, as some of you may see. And before I do that, I'm just going to share, this isn't a question, but we just had a little, I don't know, maybe a little tip or a little positive comment from one of the participants, Nikki. This person said, self-care is paramount. It is utterly exhausting living and reliving daily traumas each day, i.e. oversharing graphic videos, text, posts, etc. I personally try to remind myself and my family to wake up at a regular time, make an effort to groom and get dressed daily, practice meditation and mindfulness exercises, limit social media, and exercise and/or indulge in a positive hobby. So thank you for that, Nikki. I think we can all agree to those kind of self-care rituals that can help all the time. So thank you for that. Okay, so then for my next question, and this is the one where I'm gonna let it go free, whoever, whatever panelists would like to give their input. You know, we've seen a lot of changes, as we just talked about, some positive, some negative, some we're not really sure which way they're going. But we've all had the opportunity to discuss. So how are you taking some of this information that we've discussed and using it in a professional or personal way? So feel free. I'm gonna step back and let everyone go for it.
Well, I'll go if no one wants to go first. And I know I have to get off right before
I know
2.
we have some that are gonna hop off, so no problem.
Very quickly, because I want to make sure that everybody else can talk. For me, as a 56-year-old white male being in law enforcement for going on my 34th year, what this has done to me professionally and personally is, and I've fought it because I said, no, I'm right. And through the help of numerous people, and specifically Karen Downer, I got to give her credit for this one, for the president of NAACP, I kept looking at everything as a white male through that lens. No, we don't do that here. That's not what we're about. But it doesn't matter what we do or don't do. It's a matter of what people think and what people perceive. And if a man or a person of color is walking down the street, or is out at 2 o'clock in the morning, or is waiting for the bus, you know, lately when I see someone, I think for a minute, what are they thinking right now? Are they thinking that the next cop that comes down is going to stop them? I don't think that. I think, no, they're not doing anything. They're waiting for the bus. But do they think that? And if they think that, then that's not good. And I'm not doing my job right here in Bensalem. So that's my goal, is to make sure that I don't want people thinking that. You know, if they're law-abiding citizens, I don't want them thinking that they're going to be stopped by the police or treated unfairly by anybody. It doesn't have to be police, by anybody. So both personally, I stopped looking through my lens. I'm trying. Every day I try harder to stop looking through my lens as a white male, 56-year-old white male, and try to look through my lens a little differently. And I want to make sure that somebody that is standing at the bus stop or in a store or in the Wawa, I'm like, could they really be thinking that are they going to be harassed later today? And that's very personally bothersome to me. So that's my pledge. That's what goes there. That's what bothers me. And I think it wasn't until recently that I really understood that. I said I understood it, but I don't think I did. So that's me.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Okay. I can jump in because actually what I want to share kind of thing partners well with what Fred just shared. So I'm glad Fred shared that, because one of the things that I've been honoring at the forefront of everything is that perception is rooted in reality. So we don't know what we don't know. And I think that teaching has been really influential for me engaging in these conversations, because we're all starting at different levels. I know that a lot of people want to move to action, but there really is urgency in dismantling our worldviews, how we see things, how we engage with society, and what kind of realities we continually deny that people live through, right? So there is perceptions of this distrust, but the distrust that Black and Brown, Black Indigenous people of color experience within the policing systems, within criminal justice system, within the medical system is real, and is rooted in data that has been collected over years through narratives, through our own lived experiences, that say that there is an actual real threat, that I would be treated differently, that these things are factual information. And so that perception is a protective mechanism that lets us know what is potentially a reality. And so, you know, being willing to honor and let people's narratives be at the forefront of everything we do, I think is something that I'm practicing or that I'm bringing now to the work, knowing that people are different levels. And for myself personally, tying into what Marlene had shared, you know, about the talking about the different sides, one of the things that I no longer do is I set a boundary. I no longer debate humanity. If people want to talk to me about issues that are about life and death, I don't debate humanity. And so if we want to have a critical conversation about systemic and structural ways or interpersonal, internalized biases, internalized superiority and inferiority, we can. But I'm not going to debate what is just a commonsensical baseline declarative statement of whether people deserve to live or die or be treated fairly or not. That's what I'm not doing anymore. So that has been a commitment through this work that I've had to make to be able to sustain myself.
Yeah, I think someone who's in that place on this journey that we talk about isn't even ready at all there's other things that need to happen before they can have any type of conversation. Yeah, definitely. Okay. Anybody else? Perfect, Tanya.
Sure, Jess, thank you. So I'll start with what I don't do anymore, what I've had to back away from, and that is I've had to give myself a break from even having some of the conversations just in general, because they are weighty. And as I talked about earlier, a lot of what we are seeing play out on the news and in the media is not new for many of us. These are things that we live with every day. I have a Black husband and 2 Black sons and a Black daughter that I worry about every single day, every time they leave my home. So those are things that not only as a practitioner that I work through, but I carry it as a parent and as a Black woman. So there are definitely times when I have to give myself a timeout, and I recognize that. And because I recognize it, I'm teaching my family to do the same thing. I no longer want my children to feel like they are the voice for all Black America, that they are the voices for every Black and brown child that they engage with, because they are in a community that will sometimes make them feel like, so what do you think? Let me hear what your thoughts are, because they are too processing what's happening around them and what they see. So those are some of the very lessons that I'm working through in my own home. As a professional, I am grateful that we continue to, as I mentioned, have these discussions. Matt, when you talked about those in your office who are starting to acknowledge and recognize and work through some of the biases and some of the training that we spent some time, 5 days we were with your team. And it helps to know that at least one person, I know there were more than one, but when someone can make a change in the way that they see another person, or when they stop and slow down and really use that thinking, that side of the brain that we talked about, that causes you to really be intentional about your actions before you respond to something that you might inherently respond differently to if you were not recognizing where your biases and your prejudices lay. So that's the reason why I started doing more of this work. The diversity side of my profession, I started doing some 30 years ago. But this race equity work, as we continue to do it, this is causing all of us to really stop and think and bring some awareness to our actions and our thinking. So I want to continue these, not just the conversations, but like Dr. Stewart said, some intentionality and some recognizing of how we process what's before us. So thank you.
Thank you, Tanya.
And to that, can you all hear me?
Yeah.
I just want to add that, again, just being willing to communicate is so critically essential. And Fred, I just want to follow up for a quick second on what you just said, because I feel like you said something really very powerful and important in thinking about, could that be what somebody else is thinking? Can we put ourselves in somebody else's shoes? Can we, again, not necessarily think that we know what other people are thinking, we know what their experiences are, we're making assumptions, but, to recognize if we could, as humans, put ourselves in somebody else's shoes, given the climate and the history, and understanding what has happened and what could be happening, and appreciate what somebody else might be thinking, what that fear may be, what that fear is. It's driven from a lived experience. And for me, the answers around all of this are, how do we come out of our place where we are and engage in regular communications with our community members, so that we can begin to sort of dial back that needle a little bit and change that conversation, so that more of us can know about the other side so that we can begin to sort of change the narrative around all of this. I just think it's really important, but we've got to start with ourselves. And I do think that that's where us learning more about ourselves and our biases and thinking about other people, putting ourselves in their shoes would really help us all go a much further way, I think, in this work.
Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead, Matt, of course. But you're muted, do you know that? Okay.
So I think that courage comes in many depths, many forms. And I think that there's a social responsibility if you have a very big platform that you have to exhibit proportional amount of courage. And these conversations, these movements are difficult because the status quo has been entrenched for so long. But so to put my money where my mouth is and to give Fred a lot of credit because he's been with me the whole time on this, I took a personal challenge to try to convince the chiefs of police, who you all, I'm sure you all, well, number one, they're all white, they're all male in Bucks County, that we need to be supportive of this movement. And this was before George Floyd got murdered. It's still late in the game because this has been going on for years, for centuries, but and they permitted me at the least to go forward with this Walking While Black, Love is the Answer program. And I know many of you have participated as moderators and facilitators. But then I was challenged again by the Peace Center, and they said, that's not good enough. You have to convince all of the police chiefs to have all of the officers under their command watch the film. Whew. This is the tough order, but at the risk of really alienating and annoying people that I've now incessantly persuaded to do this, we have convinced 34 out of the 40 police chiefs in Bucks County to commit to have all of the officers under their command view this film. So that's close to 1,000. That's close to 1,000 police officers. And if every one of them can at least be thoughtful and empathetic like Fred has now become, that's how you effectuate change. That's how Tayna could have some hope for her kids and her husband that every car stop, every police interaction is not going to be cause for concern that somebody's going to get hurt or die. But I think each of us, not just on the panel, but everybody watching and all of our friends and our friends and our friends, we can all exhibit some amount of courage to step outside of our comfort zone. For me, that obligation is much greater, but everybody has an obligation. We cannot accept the status quo.
Definitely. I just want to see if there's any, oh, go ahead, Marlene, I just saw, perfect.
Okay. So for me, some of the lessons and learning have been about passing the mic and about following Black women. And by that, I mean very literally, like unsubscribing and unfollowing all the like white anti-racist people that have mostly been my mentors, and really dedicating my listening to the voices of Black people, Black femmes and Black women, and Black men as well, but mostly Black women. And that's been transformative for me in terms of my perspective. And it's also propelled me through my own trauma and grief and being a homicide survivor to hit the streets and to like check myself about all the privilege that I have that allows me to process that is not multi-generational and is not, there's not like an epigenetic hit inside of my genes about how trauma affects me. So I've also been organizing peacekeepers. So we work with Black Lives Matter protests in Bucks County to be a peaceful presence during protests to de-escalate tension and to protect the protesters. And that's been really intense and hard and scary. And so there's literally a feeling of like putting my life on the line. And to me, that's what is required in this moment, without a doubt. And I think if I'm not having conversations that are radically different in my family, in my faith settings, in my workplace, in my neighborhood, well, we don't have a school bus stop right now, but amongst, you know, friends and in Zoom calls about race and racism, then I'm not showing up. And as much as I think I show up, I really have a lot of work to do. And then, you know, the last thing I'll say is that, and I spoke about this when I had my little session with you all, is that this work not only repairs some of the damage and hopefully ends some of the systemic problems that racism causes amongst people of color, but it helps me as a white person to regain my own humanity, because my ancestors traded their humanity for privileges and power. So as hard and painful and scary as some of this is, I also am truly regaining my humanity, and I can feel it. And it's liberating, and it's important. And it's important that white people know we have skin in this too. It's probably a really problematic expression. So I also became a lifetime member of the NAACP. So if you have the means to do that, that's a great place to, and I contribute now to bail funds, which is not something I had done before. And I'll say one more thing, which is that I truly never would have seen myself that understood or sympathized with a movement called Defund the Police. I'm in a family of law enforcement. I have a very positive relationship with the police in my town. And I listened to Black people and to teenagers who really helped me to understand the deeper significance of that, and not as something to like end the police department, which is, you know, of course, what the other side likes to say, but in terms of supporting wellness for the greater good of our community. And that has really been a personal and professional transformation in my consciousness. And, you know, it doesn't matter how long I've been doing this work, I still clearly have a lot to learn. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yes, Celia. I'm going to unmute you. Oh, there you go.
Okay, thank you so much. The information that we have discussed is helping me in my personal and activities endeavors. I applaud the diversity of this panel, their activism, involvement with the community. The social separation required during this coronavirus pandemic is here to stay. It's going to be a long haul. So I encourage all of you, young and old, to participate on online activism. I am also inspired by science. As you know, right now, I am the American with the foreign accent. So I am not sure if you understood what I mean when I said the racial authoritarianism. This is Science magazine that I hope you had a chance to see it, because it's the special issue on racial issues. And this is the special cover where you see where I got this inspiration. And somebody's wearing this cap that says, "We the people." Yes, we the people are obliged to work together for the greater good of the humanity. I am also inspired from Science Magazine's issue, because there are so many things that we have to overcome. And here is some of the conclusions that they recommend. People need to participate on online activism. For example, linking and sharing content, get involved in political discussions. Engage in two styles or online, use hashtag or use your online advocacy. Reaching, persuading, mobilizing, antagonizing, confronting leaders and advocates in both sides. And then research. is a vital priority because the key function of the right-wing media ecosystem is disinformation distribution. So we have to counter that. And with that, I thank you, all of you, for letting me be here to say a few words.
Thank you, Celia. I'm trying to, I think, Jenny.
Yes, I can. I'll be very quick. I just wanted to say that one other aspect of this series that was so important was the connections and linkages that gave people opportunities to inform the participants as panelists, as well as the participants of the initiatives that are taking place across the county, whether it be these grassroots mutual aid kind of direct connection that we foster between immigrants and allies, but at each level to have a sense of that broader view. And one practical outcome of it was that in speaking with Carolyn Pachas, who hosted my session, both the English and the Spanish, she said, I mentioned to her our roundtable, which we sponsor for agencies, services, and programs that provide services for immigrants throughout Bucks County. We have over 50 groups involved in that now. And she said, well, why isn't the YWCA involved? And I was like, maybe I'm emailing and inviting the wrong person because, we did just start last year. And now the YWCA, and at our session in October 15th or 14th that's coming up, she will be able to come to present, and then bring back those resources to the many Spanish-speaking community members that you serve. So super practical. Just wanted to say thank you. That was a very wonderful connection.
Yeah, no, I think all these, that's how this kind of stuff picks up momentum. So I totally agree. We have two quick questions, Matt, I know, and for anybody else who needs to hop off, thank you for being here. I know some of you might have to go. There's a specific question for Fred. So Lynn, if you could send that question to me, I will put my email address in the chat. And if you send that to me, I will make sure that it gets to Fred. So I'm gonna put my email in here at YWCA Bucks, and feel free to send that to me and I will make sure that that question gets answered. And then the last question is about the other webinars. So an anonymous said, besides your own webinar, which other webinars did you all enjoy watching from this series? So if anyone has watched the other, I mean, they all had their own, I think, specific importance, but if anybody specifically watched another one that they really enjoyed, if you feel like sharing really quickly.
Jessica, I did. I watched live Marlene's and Matt's, and I watched the recording of Ashley's, Dr. Stewart's, and I enjoyed all of them for different reasons. So I encourage you to continue this series even after we move beyond today, because they've been educational and beneficial. I also wanted to address one of the questions that I saw, to extend this question here. Just because I do consulting work for the Peace Center, I'm gonna make a plug for them. But more importantly, because there are lots of opportunities to be in conversation in community with others around our community in Bucks County and beyond. And I think that's important, that we have discussions with one another, as we've been talking about today. The Peace Center has been doing this work since 1982, and the professionals in that organization have lots of experience, and there are lots of rich discussions that happen. So I just encourage your listeners who have not had an opportunity to look on their website and join some of their community conversations and enjoy them as I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to give some input there on the other webinars?
Yeah, I'd like to just say that I think I attended all, but maybe about 4 of the presentations. But I learned something from each one of them as well. And I think that anybody who comes to this, with an open mind and an open heart is going to learn something. Thank you all for recording them so that these are left behind for people to continue to listen to and go back to listen to the ones that they didn't get to see here the first time around.
Yeah, I was just going to say that they are all on YouTube and they are all on Facebook. So if you go to YWCA Bucks County's YouTube page, you can watch any that you missed. Is there anybody else who wants to kind of say anything before I wrap up? Go ahead, Celia.
I just feel so excited that you include me here.
Oh, well, thank you. We were very excited to have you here. I think that goes for everyone. Again, everyone's input is a little bit different. And I think that's kind of the beauty of having a diverse group of people talk about this topic.
And I had to say, when I moved here to Bucks County, I came from Bethesda, Maryland. And I met Marlene Pray. I mean, I've been follow her, Jenny. I mean, people who really, really are so honestly dedicated to equality and justice. So thank you all, and the panelists. I hear your and try to see your presentations, and to me is so enlightening. Everything that you say is just for the records and for the better of our community and our country.
Definitely. I think Celia just kind of closed it up for me, because that was an awesome kind of closing remark. So thank you for that. I want to thank all of our panelists one last big time, and all of our participants. I want all our participants to keep, and panelists, to keep your eyes out, because we are planning we're going to take, a week or two to plan our future ones, our future sessions, but we do have some in the works for October, where we're going to be talking about voting and legislation and some other obviously always important topics. So thank you all again, and feel free, the YWCA is always open for suggestions and collaboration and discussions. So thank you again. G, do you have anything that you want to? Okay, no, he's like, I'm done talking. Thank you all, and have a great rest of your day.